All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Sit Heads Meditation Club. My name is John. I organize this group. Sit Heads is a sitting and social group for people interested in deep meditation practice. Everything we do is free and donation-based. If you want to hang out with us, you can find us at sit-heads.com. All right, so that is the deal with Sit Heads. Now let's talk about what the deal is with tonight's august guest, Ronya Banks. So Ronya is a Vipassana or insight meditation instructor. She has been practicing for over 35 years. She has been teaching for over 10 years. She's done over 2 years of cumulative silent Vipassana retreat. She has studied with over 30 different teachers, including little-known teachers such as Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, and Joseph Goldstein. She is the founder and lead teacher of Asheville Insight Meditation in North Carolina. She was also a Buddhist monastic in the Burmese tradition for just under a year, which I think is interesting. Over the years, she has developed an eclectic teaching style, drawing from all these different wonderful Vipassana teachers that she's been fortunate to study with. So let me bring Ronya up to join me. Hi, Ronya. Is there anything that you want to say before we get started?
That was funny, Danya.
You can use it. That's yours to keep.
Oh, thank you. I think I'll use it from now on. No, not in particular.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being here, Ronya. It's really a pleasure. And what we're going to do is, as we discussed last time we spoke, is you and I will chat for maybe 30 minutes or something like that, maybe less, maybe a little more, but around there. I find that not only is that fun for me, which is, of course, the most important thing, it also sort of plants seeds for the Q&A, right? So people get a better sense of the sorts of things they might want to ask you. So we'll do that. And then we will open it up for Q&A, and we'll go for about an hour. We'll go until the hour mark, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Does that sound all right? Okay, great. So one thing you and I talked about a little bit, but we really only scratched the surface, was the issue of addiction. And so this is something you speak openly about, Ronya?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, you shared with me that addiction was something that you struggled with when you were much younger, and that in fact led you to the Dharma and to meditation practice, specifically the anxiety that followed you after quitting, right? So I'd love to talk to you about the relationship between anxiety and meditation practice and the Dharma, and the relationship between addiction and meditation practice and the Dharma. So when you found mindfulness practice or Vipassana practice, can you talk about why and how that lessened your anxiety? What exactly it was in your practice that seemed to counteract that or recontextualize it, or whatever it did that ended up bringing you relief?
Yeah, so when I quit using my drugs of choice, I realized the anxiety that I had been self-medicating for really high anxiety. And because all the anxiety came back as soon as I quit. And I'm like,
Sure.
Oh, God. So I went to a local library, and this was back when we had, everyone went to libraries and we didn't have our devices to search. And I was looking for antidotes to anxiety. I found what was called mindfulness. And back then in 1985, I never had heard of mindfulness. It wasn't a whole, a thing that everybody knew about, like
Wasn't
today.
an industry yet?
Yeah, I was like, what is mindfulness? So I went to another place, a video store, and I found some guided meditation tapes, mindfulness meditation tapes. And I was pretty desperate because I just didn't want to be living my life with this high anxiety.
Yeah.
And the first thing that I noticed was that my anxiety started reducing. It started reducing a lot. Just from the soothing, I was doing body scan practice, where you go through and you're mindful of all the sensations in your body and go through. For some reason, it calmed my bodily formation down. It felt really soothing to my body.
Do you remember who the teacher was by any chance?
I had no idea.
Okay.
I had like 3 different guided mindfulness tapes that I would go back and forth and listen to, and I didn't know anyone, so I didn't know. Names were not important to me at that time.
Sure.
As I continued my sitting practice, I saw, mindfulness of the thinking, when I started adding emotions and thoughts to my practice, I started to see that I had chronic planning mind, future thinking mind, and that I was constantly going into the future and planning how to take care of everything so that nothing bad happens, and imagining all these different worst case scenarios. So my mind was catastrophizing, and I was just, the way that I was thinking and relating to the world was from a place of fear and anxiety. Yeah. So I was creating a lot of anxiety for myself, and I saw that. Then I went on this one retreat, and I saw how anxious I was and how I was creating all this extra anxiety. And that meditation was just, at that point, it was to keep soothing the bodily formation. I hadn't seen how I was causing it. Yeah. So I was meditating a lot just to keep the anxiety down. But once I started seeing how I was creating anxiety, I said, whoa, this is really intense. And I went home after a retreat to visit my family. And I was like, oh gosh, I wanted to tell them how I was creating anxiety. And my mother was, oh, you need to do so-and-so. If you don't do this, then, catastrophizing. And then my dad was like, oh, so they were constantly going into the future, and they were worrying, and they were projecting all their worries on each other. And the whole family was getting into future scenario worrying. And my family, the most common thing, my family's Middle Eastern. I migrated to the country when I was 5, but a lot of fear-based thinking, a lot of worrying, fearing. And I was like, oh, I come by this honestly. Yeah. I learned this really well. And my whole family all says, you're making me a nervous wreck, when they get really stressed out. That's their number one. It's like our family slogan, you're making me a nervous wreck. Right. So anyhow, I started breaking the habit of futurizing and catastrophizing, and I started going beneath that to mindfully explore and be with the fear, because there was an ocean of fear of failure, fear of not being enough, fear of not being loved, fear of being rejected. Fear. So as I started taking care of that fear and really bringing mindful attention to it, the fear and the anxiety started to reduce on a regular basis. Anxiety is still my hindrance of choice. If you talk about the 5 mental hindrances.
It's a good one. It's a good choice.
It's genetically, I think I come by it honestly, but
it's one of mine too.
People
that
say,
one and doubt.
Really? Doubt. Okay.
Those are restlessness and worry and doubt. Those are my 2. It's like everyone has like a love language or whatever. I think everyone has 1 or 2 hindrances. That's like theirs. Those are mine.
Sure. Genetically, I inherited that. But I listen to people who like sloth and torpor, and they, lazy and fantasizing or whatever. And I think, gosh, why couldn't have I gotten that hindrance?
I'd love to meet someone whose hindrances are sloth and torpor and restlessness and worry. I'd love to see what that looks like. I wonder if such a person exists.
Well, in addiction recovery, that it does exist.
Okay.
It's pretty common in the people who are in addiction recovery, because what they do is they're so anxious and there's so much anxiety. So generalized anxiety disorder, I believe, is the number one problem, mental health problem that people in addiction recovery have, and the second is depression. So what they do is they stress themselves out with their anxiety, and then they fall asleep as soon as they sit down to try to pay attention to something because they're exhausted.
Right.
But that was never my way of being.
Well, let me talk about sort of pull back the curtain a second. I'll tell you why, one of the reasons why I asked that question. One was because I'm interested and I think other people are interested, but I also had a more personal reason, which is that I went through an interesting phenomenon where I went on a fairly lengthy retreat and I felt like I'd become quite an adept meditator. I was feeling pretty good about myself, to be honest. And I came back, and within like maybe a month of being back, I had like a panic attack. I was completely overwhelmed by anxiety. I'd been months and months on retreat, and then I moved to New York City, which is something of a shock to the system. And I realized eventually through reading some stuff and taking some teachings that I hadn't taken before, that not like, because at first my feeling was, well, what the hell? I'm such a good meditator. What's the point of all this if I'm still feeling like this, right? Like, what kind of meditator am I? And I felt sort of, in a way, betrayed by the practice, or I felt like I had fallen short, you can imagine. And eventually I realized, with the help of some further instruction, that actually the way I was meditating was probably making my anxiety worse, because I was trying to meditate my anxiety away. And I had this adversarial relationship with anxiety. It was something I was trying to get rid of. I was averse to it. And so I was meditating as an avoidance strategy. But the thing was, that was not obvious to me until it had been pointed out to me skillfully that, hey, the thing to do with anxiety is to essentially let it be there and don't fight it. It will live out its own lifespan if you don't fuel it with avoidance. I would never have realized that on my own. I would have continued playing tug of war with it and empowering it forever. And it sounds like you very naturally, through meditation and mindfulness, like I had to read about and learn about mindfulness as applied to anxiety in order to sort of deploy it skillfully in service of my anxiety. Before that, I was using it antagonistically to my anxiety. And I wonder, do you have thoughts on how one can avoid that trap, or whether you think that's a common trap, or whether it was maybe just certain picadillos of mine? Is that something you've heard about before, a phenomenon you've encountered?
Yeah, and I still have found myself doing that, by the way. I don't know that instinct to avoid pain ever goes away, because we're wired to avoid the unpleasant, right? So every so often I find myself, when I'm feeling really anxious, trying to soothe the the little lizard body within, which is a skillful thing to do. And it's also they're so subtle, right?
Yeah.
Like, are we soothing the little lizard, inner lizard, anxious lizard, because that's the wise thing to do?
Yeah.
Or are we soothing it because we're trying to avoid feeling the anxiety? It's so subtle. And I find myself starting from a wise intention and then moving over into the trying to get rid of unwise.
And the distinction is so subtle, right? Because it's like the distinction between, if you're a Buddhist practitioner, or you are you feel an affinity to the Buddhist worldview, then a big part of the Buddhist worldview is, hey, there's a way to get rid of your suffering, and you can do it, and you should do it. And what's the difference between a sort of, there is one, but it's a thin line between the sort of healthy and sensible aspiration to do the things that will free you of your suffering, and a feeling of reactive avoidance to your suffering. And it's so easy to slip from one to the other without realizing you've done it until maybe after the fact. Do you have thoughts on how to catch the difference, or spot the difference, or what the difference is?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute. And
Yeah,
before I
yeah.
do, I just want to say that I found neuroscience research on mindfulness that
Okay.
showed that beginner meditators are using their meditation practice to avoid their difficulties.
Hmm.
So they're, trying to focus on their breath and concentration practice and et cetera, uh, to suppress their negative experiences. Whereas advanced mindfulness meditators are actually opening to their experience, right?
Hmm.
They're being with their experience, and so their pain and suffering is alleviating by being with their experience rather than trying to, use their like you said, using your meditation practice to control and take care of. One thing
Yeah.
that, I think just mindfulness is obviously the key.
Sure.
Um, I So many interesting things that I've learned about anxiety because it has been such a huge hindrance for me.
And you're also a
Um,
therapist, aren't you, Ronya? So you have training.
mhm, exactly. Yeah. So it's it's just constantly being aware of that part of us that is pushing away our experience. That's the biggest trick for me.
Yeah.
And then I can usually tell, and most people can usually tell when they're at war with their experience when there's tension.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
So where do you hold your tension? I hold it in my shoulders and my belly. Certain places I find are tensing up when I'm at war with my experience or
Yeah.
anxiety if that's the case. So I keep one eye on my body at all times. I try
Hmm.
to, constantly checking in mindfulness of the body all day long.
Yeah.
And when I find there's a knot or tension, I'm like, oh, what's going on? Let me see. Bring extra mindfulness that moment to see what's going on. What
Yeah.
am I bracing against right
Mm.
now? Um, and it's such a natural thing. Well, where's my mind right now? If I'm bracing against something, what am I believing? What am I making up? Um, Dreading, wanting, craving, the whole wonderful gambit of being a human being. It doesn't go away even from, years and years and daily practice. But I catch myself sooner,
Yeah.
right? And then as soon as I catch myself, the very first thing that I teach people to do is to relax. Deep breath and relax. Because when we're bracing, we're tensing, we're up, whereas, relax, let go, breathe, and then turn towards your experience, right? Um,
Yeah.
and just allow the anxiety to be the predominant experience right now. And what does develop from that? Compassion for being a human being with this karmic pattern that it's not as often now. It takes a lot for me to feel anxiety, but it still comes from time to time.
Yeah. You're still a human being, right? Still
Hello.
a body.
Yeah.
There are a few things in that I want to pick up.
Yeah.
I just really appreciate that wisdom. I think the idea of using the body as sort of a barometer, right? Or as almost like an early warning system, that's something just because of that link that's always there. It is very easy to get too cerebral with your meditation practice. And,
Mm.
and I think lots of wonderful teachers really stress the embodied aspect. And I appreciate that very much. And I also think you're right about I talked about the subtlety of the distinction between sort of being aversive to suffering or pain versus the more healthy aspiration to just sensibly do the things that free you from it, which the sensible thing usually being to let go of your aversion, right? That's usually the thing that does it. But I think you're absolutely right that you can tell the difference, right? If you're just being mindful. One of them feels like you're fighting something and the other one doesn't. So I totally see that. It's just a question of the answer is so often just be mindful, right?
Mm.
Um, and the one other thing I was going to ask, and then I want to talk about addiction a little bit, is and then we'll go to Q&A. You mentioned the neuroscience paper that said that beginning meditators tend to use the meditation in a more adversarial way toward their experience. And I wonder if this is not, I think, a searing insight from me, but I wonder if the way that you described it seems like certain forms of meditation might lend themselves might make you more prone to using the meditation adversarially versus other meditations where it might be harder to do that. And without this isn't to denigrate any style of meditation, because I've practiced both of these, but it sounds almost like, well, you might maybe concentration practice where you steady your mind on one object might, in the hands of a less experienced meditator, lend itself to trying to block things, right? Whereas if you're doing a Vipassana practice where the stated instructions are to simply observe anything that arises, right? Across the four foundations, across the five aggregates, it seems like that might be a harder instruction to take and inadvertently twist a little bit into a resistive way of practicing. Would you agree with that sort of observation about those two styles?
Yes, I would. In fact, jhana practice, that's the deep concentration practices, really lends itself to addiction, to the piti and the pleasure that arises from the concentration states. Yeah, it can be very seductive to use. We can take any practice and use it to avoid dealing with our reality.
Sure.
I've even used mindfulness, to avoid dealing. Well, if I can just be really aware, like precisely aware, then this experience will go away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. If I observe the flow of experience closely enough, it won't hurt me as much, and you become aversive. Yeah, no, I see it.
Exactly. But and what I find really interesting is I have several mindfulness students, and I teach mindfulness daily at the Addiction Recovery Center too. In fact, I see a lot of my students here today. Nice to see all of you. And I find it really interesting, and I see that I did it in my past too, is that people will continue to perceive mindfulness as a way to avoid dealing with their reality, no matter how many times you tell them, no, this is about going to your experience, not avoiding your experience.
Yeah.
So many people use language that indicates they're using mindfulness to be more happy, and they're using mindfulness to, even though those are fruits of our practice, their language indicates that they're still using their meditation to avoid. And let me just focus on loving kindness practice so that I can gladden the mind and not have to deal with difficult mental or emotional states. And it's like, yeah, good to resource, but you still want to go to your experience as much as you can and be with it if possible. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ronnie, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that the mind is amazing how it will use anything to avoid dealing with reality. Delusions are endless, as they say in the Zen tradition.
Yeah. Mara is a sneaky individual for sure. When you mentioned that people could get addicted to jhana, I will say, I don't have a dog in this fight at all, or a horse in this race, or a less unpleasant metaphor. I'll go with I don't have a horse in this race. But we've definitely had teachers who come here and would say, people will tell you could get addicted to jhana. That's nonsense. And I would love, one day I want to get a jhana, I want to get like a jhana teacher and you in a room to discuss the ups and downs and ins and outs of jhana, vipassana, how they relate to each other. There's just so many interesting perspectives. But the truth is, ultimately there's probably just truth in all of them, would be my guess, depending on how you look at it. But speaking of addiction, I would love to talk to you a little bit about addiction, because you had a substance addiction. But when we talked about addiction, the thing that came to mind for me was how I feel like all my problems are addiction problems in a sense, or they're all my problems of wanting and craving and aversion are problems of addiction, right? Addiction to certain states, addiction to certain experiences that I want. And if I'm having a different one, I want to be free of that one and have this other one. And in my life, it could be fairly gross, because I'm addicted to things, like so many of us are, to my digital devices. And I have to put things in place actively to not just be sort of a phone monkey, frittering away all my time doing this stuff that I don't even enjoy as I'm doing it. I certainly don't feel content or enriched afterwards, but it sort of calls to me. Do you feel like addiction is, I know that there are groups that focus on Dharma practice for addiction, but is there a sense in which all Dharma practice is Dharma practice for addiction?
Yes, I would say so, because the second noble truth is the truth of craving and clinging, and that the root of all suffering is this almost constant desire and craving for things to be a certain way. I want this, I don't want that. I want this, but I want more of it. I want this, but I want it to last. Oh, this feels really good. Maybe I'll feel better if I get more. It's we're wired for this craving, the seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And I find it, when I started studying Buddhism, I found it amazing that Siddhartha, cool guy, figured it out nearly 2,600 years ago. He saw the nature of this constantly wanting mind, and the mind that's I've noticed, my mind typically it goes to dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is the root of a lot of this. This wanting and dissatisfaction, and wanting and dissatisfaction. If only, if only, if only. And there's this habit that we have of not being present in the moment. This is the human mind. I don't know anyone who doesn't have this habit. If you have a human mind, not being fully present in this moment because we're putting off our happiness or our being, if only and when this happens, then I can be happier. Then I'll feel better. Then I'll be able to be present. Or when that happens, I saw it really clearly when I'd done a lot of long retreats, and I'd go on the retreats and I'd be like, oh, I'm so happy. Before I would go to the retreat, preparing to go to the retreat, oh, I can't wait till I get to the retreat. I really want this retreat. I really need this retreat. So I'm like, no, actually, you're preparing right now. You're packing right now. You're paying the bills. Be present with that. But part of my mind was like, no, I want to be at the retreat already.
Yeah.
I'd get to the retreat and I'd be satisfied and like, oh, finally, I'm at the retreat. Now I can really deeply practice. And 3 days later, I'm like, when am I leaving?
I know this story.
What's the calendar? I don't want to be here. I want to be home. So
I got plans that I'm going to work out in my head while I'm here at retreat instead of,
exactly.
Sure.
There's this constant getting to the workplace and like, oh, what time is it? When can I go home? Then getting home, there's this constant putting off our life. When I'm done with this thing, then I can relax, or then I can be present. And it's, I've committed to seeing this dissatisfied mind and being like, yeah, okay, but right now you're here, be fully here. Just rest in what's happening now. And there's so much richness to what's happening now whenever I can relax and arrive.
Do you feel like it can be like, do you ever have the experience that as wonderful it is to do that, as wonderful as it is to do that, it's hard to do that? Like, I find that when I'm in the throes of craving, and I actually think that people who had chemical addictions there's really a lot of potential wisdom there, and I'm not surprised that some of them, including one right here, have made for wonderful teachers, because it makes so stark the problem of craving. It's more in your face. It's not a sort of craving that's papered over by society and that you're told is okay. So, I'm not surprised that it brings wisdom. What I find is that it's hard. Like, if even for a simple thing, like I had a party last night, and I threw a party in my home, actually for a bunch of sitheads based in New York. Actually, it was very nice. But there was some fruitcake left over, and I ate a lot of it. I ate a lot of that fruitcake today. More than if I were looking on from an impartial distance, I would have probably chosen for myself. And I know that if I had shifted into the mode of eating mindfully, the way that we did at the party was called Shut Up and Eat. It was a mindful, silent dinner party. We would chat and hang out, and then ring a bell, and then for 10 minutes, mindful, silent eating, and then back to chat, and then ring the bell. It was a lot of fun. But when I'm eating mindfully, if I'd been doing that, I know I would have seen the craving, made a decision, put down my fork. It would have been actually relatively straightforward, but it was hard to get myself to do it. Part of me didn't want to engage that mindfulness, because I knew that would mean that I'm not going to eat this fruitcake. And right now I want it. How do you deal with that? Do you know what I'm saying? It's like my present self doesn't want to become my future mindful self, who will wisely and happily forego that additional treat. But the unwise present self, it's hard. There's like a hump to get over. How do you, any thoughts or insights or advice on getting over that initial hump to become the wise, mindful version that behaves as you're describing?
Yeah, I don't have a secret like antidote to this.
That's really too bad.
Yeah, I know. Wouldn't that be great if I could just be like, here it is,
Yeah.
everyone. I know with all my addictions that I had to suffer enough to get to the point to where, and then mindfully be with the result. Have you ever seen, there's the mindfulness apps, what's the fellow's name, the neuroscientist?
Judd Brewer?
Yeah, with the anxiety and
yeah, his craving to quit, unwinding
craving
anxiety.
To quit, right.
We had Judd as a guest, actually.
Oh yeah, okay, great. I love Judd's work. And he says that you have to update the part of your brain after you've eaten the fifth piece of fruitcake of all things, or whatever. Mindfully be with the engorged feeling in the stomach, the feeling really full, the feeling really heavy, to update the pleasure center of the brain that says, this is going to be great. So once we update that part of our brain that says this is going to be great, because reality is it's not great afterwards. We usually feel terrible after we partake in whatever our addiction is. So I think really bringing mindfulness to how badly we feel after we've had the second piece, instead of just staying at the first piece, or and then of course setting our intention to live a balanced life. Renunciation is one of the primary practices in Buddhism, and that's renunciating, giving into craving mind, and eating more than what we need, and doing anything else in excess, right? Any of our addictions. So just having first of all, if we're mindful, we'll see that, I have a really unhealthy relationship with whatever it is. I tend to have more than what I need, and then mindfully be with how bad you feel afterwards, right? Like, oh wow, my stomach hurts, my head hurts, I'm really tired, more tired than I normally would be if I only had one piece. And then I think that'll update our neurally update that part of our brain that says this is going to be great if I have more.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a practice, and sometimes I actually choose to do something really unmindfully.
Really?
Yeah, sometimes I say, okay, I'm not going to restrain myself. I'm going to really just enjoy every bite here, and I'm going to eat as much as I want to, um, because I'm so mindful and setting intention and being really careful and all this. And every so often, the inner hedonist just wants to come out, And
Yeah.
what usually happens when I let the inner hedonist come out, I'm full after one muffin. You know what I mean? As long as I give it permission to really enjoy this. If I want 2 muffins, great. 3, that's great. But usually I get satisfied much sooner when all that tension, the tension around it.
It's like having a cheat day if you're trying to like be very careful about how you eat. They say to always sort of give yourself a cheat day because it's better to have like a little pressure valve, to let it out than to have it just build, and like to do it deliberately rather than have it just build and build and build.
Yeah, and the most important thing through all of this is really to have compassion for ourselves.
Yeah.
And patience with ourselves. And I know that people don't quit whatever unhealthy pattern they have until they're ready to, and that's grace. If you believe in grace, I don't know what it is, but
Yeah.
it's just like, well, the Buddha taught when all the causes and conditions come together, then the shifts happen.
Yeah.
So whenever the causes and conditions all coagulate at the right time and the right place, then we're ready to let go of that unhealthy habit. Yeah.
Well, Ronya, I have monopolized your time long enough. I think we should move to Q&A. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, excellent. Brian C., would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Thanks. And thanks, Ronya, for all that you've been sharing there. My question is around effort, and we've talked a little bit about effort. So I've been on a number of silent retreats, and one example of one that I went on was a Tejaniya style, which is much freer, much more open, sort of a householder style, if you will. I recently went to a Goenka retreat, much more on the rigid side of things, I would say. And so the question is, how much effort is sort of needed? Because I think sometimes we can sort of be coddled and say, well, difficult things don't have to be difficult. And of course, you have to put in the effort, you have to work at it. But how much of it is sort of unnecessary strain and challenge, and it doesn't require that level of rigidity? And I'm just wondering where you are on that spectrum, and just how to think about the level of rigidity in practice versus what I'll call sort of the results or the forward motion of practice.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Brian. I have to say, when I first started practicing, I was a type A personality practicer. I was going to become enlightened in 5 years. I had my plan. And I learned the stages of insight, and I was practicing with the stages of insight, and I was going to be fully enlightened. I would go on long retreats with my plan, and it wasn't working out. It was not working out because I was putting in so much effort. And the more effort I put into this practice, the worse my practice became. I wasn't, moving through the stages as I normally would. And I think it's different for each person, each moment, how much effort is needed, right? What's great is all of that type A practice really got me far at the first few years of my practice. I learned a lot of things through all this striving and efforting. But if your practice is evolving, you'll see that you're holding yourself back through over efforting, right? So what is a wise effort this moment? This becomes the question. If we're tired, we're really falling asleep, we're resistant, not wanting to meditate right now, it might take more effort and more energy, because effort and energy work, Viriya, they work together. Whereas other times we can just sit and practice comes effortlessly, like with Tejaniya, right? Just the practice evolves, and all you have to do is sit back and witness it all, which is a great place to be when it's effortless. But it's that tension again, right? When we're tense, we're probably over efforting, trying too hard, right? So then the body, the posture is an amazing thing too. If I'm getting really lazy and slack, I start to lean forward. I teach a lot about the chin, and working with posture and chin to balance that effort and that energy. If I'm striving too hard, or one of us are striving too hard, actually sit back, relax into our body a little bit, drop our chin just a little bit, right? And just I'll do the effortless awareness practice, or just spacious awareness, just being aware of whatever's arising, choiceless awareness for a little while until we find that balanced place, and then go back to whatever our objective concentration is, and see how we're holding it, right? Sometimes we're holding our object with, like if we were holding, I have a ball here playing with my grandson, we're holding it like this, holding our object. Sometimes our object is right here. You know what I mean? Like right here. And so then it's like loosening the grip and letting it move away from us a little bit, creating that space between ourselves and our awareness of whatever we're aware of at that time. So and then sometimes when we're so lazy and everything, whatever's happening, I'll just fantasize or just worry, make my list or whatever, then be like, okay, I need to bring in more effort, see if I can zero in on my awareness of my object just a little bit more, see if I can bring in more clarity of my object, see if I can notice more nuanced characteristics of my object, see where it's located in the body, and just get really, more curiosity, more intentionality, more energy. And, it's a constant dance, isn't it? Like you're dancing with this partner, and your partner is your experience this moment, right? And sometimes your partner is going to do things that you're not expecting, your dance partner. So it's like, oh, okay. And we have to have a flexible mind. This rigid, tense, striving mind holds us back to some degree. Yeah. And what's really interesting is we start seeing how we're doing it in our daily lives, because this practice is not worth anything if it doesn't translate to our daily lives, right? And so I noticed how I was over efforting and over striving in my life and trying to force and control and manipulate, and then I'm like, oh, okay, relax. Maybe some more allowing reality to unfold is what's needed right now, instead of trying to orchestrate everything. Yeah. So it's the Buddha says that what arises from our practice is wisdom. This is the, part of the wisdom is seeing how much effort is needed each moment. Yeah. I'm really anxious and some really hindrances is there. Sometimes what's needed is to relax more and allow it to unfold. And other times I need to really work with it skillfully, and it'll take more effort.
As you're describing, I'm finding it a little difficult in my mind, just for my own practice, and it's not necessarily for a question to you, but I'm curious what you think, if you have a thought, is distinguish between tightness and focus. Because
I just want to jump in and maybe make sure that we have,
sure.
That's an interesting follow-up, but is it okay if we, hopefully we'll have time for follow-up questions and second round questions.
That's fine. Thanks, John. Thanks,
all
everyone.
Right.
I'll write it down for the future.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you, Ronya. Daniel, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, Rhonda. I really resonated with your comments about going between being dissatisfied and craving. That that's really my life. I'm 69 years old. I don't want to say survived, but survived seemed to be a good word. I have survived several traumas in my life. And the main focus of my life seems to be I've been waiting for decades to be happy. And I'm also waiting to regain myself. I've seemed to have lost myself because of these traumas. And I'd like any feedback from you that you can give me regarding letting go of that constant being dissatisfied and craving to be just being dissatisfied with my present life and craving to be happy, craving to get back to myself. I'd like to learn how to just be happy with where I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great intention, Daniel, to have, to be happy with where you are. Yeah, I think that's a great beginning, and I just want to say that my heart goes out to you for all of your traumas. You know, when we've had trauma in our lives, the mind goes into the constant fight, flight, or freeze. The nervous system doesn't feel safe. We become hypervigilant. You know, if you had PTSD, you can have a lot of flashbacks and a lot of unpleasant things. The mind starts seeing, it becomes very dark and depressed and sees everything as a problem and a project and something to get through, you know, and it becomes exhausting. And I'm speaking from experience too. I had a lot of trauma growing up. And of course, my addiction put me through even more trauma. But so the one thing that doesn't help is self-pity. Self-pity is such a drain. You know, it's that, oh God, I wish, why do I have to feel this way? Why is this my karma? Why? If only, and why, if only. That's like, you know, when you open the bathtub drain and the water is leaking out, you're constantly trying to put more water because you're trying to take a bath. You can't because the water keeps leaking out. You know, and that's what this wanting it not to be that way is like the drain at the bottom of the bathtub, you know. But it's hard. It's hard when you don't feel safe and comfortable with within your own body, right? Within your own heart and mind. The truth is, we don't know why. We don't understand karma. But this is your karma, right? This is your reality, and the most important thing is compassion. If I were you, I'd be doing compassion practices as much as possible. May I feel safe in my own body. May I be able to accept my measure of pain and suffering that's been given to me. May I be at ease in the moment, regardless of what's happening. May I find equanimity in the face of difficulty. Yeah. May I be compassionate, kind to myself. May I be patient. May I learn whatever I'm meant to learn in this lifetime. May I be free from suffering. And just keep doing those whatever statements that come to you and feel in your heart. Allow yourself to grieve too. This is not a craving. This is not a self-pity. Grieving is different from self-pity. You know, self-pity is the why me, whereas grieving is like, wow, grieving the loss of the life that you thought you would have, you know. Yeah, that's part of the compassion. And then, of course, reaching out to other people who have a similar measure of suffering can be very healing. Connecting with them in support groups or trauma-informed group therapy groups, something like that can be very, very helpful. I don't know if you've done that or not, but you're not alone. There's so many people suffering in that same way. And that can alleviate some of your burden to know that hey, this is often the human condition. And that can bring you joy, just sitting with other people who feel that way, supporting and giving someone else, saying something nice or helpful to someone else who's suffering similarly can make your day and bring you joy. Can give you a sense of purpose, if that's something that's possible in your life, or if it sings to your heart. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much, Ronya.
Mm.
So I have a question here that was sent to me to ask. It's a pretty straightforward one. This person asked, where can I take your classes? I didn't see much on your website. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't been teaching many classes lately. I
Okay.
have 2 Dharma study classes that I lead. And occasionally I have openings for the Dharma study classes. We go through the Buddhist lists and the Buddhist teachings and practices related to them and learn some things that the Buddha taught, quotes and stuff. I typically, before the pandemic and before I was working full time at the addiction center, I had all kinds of mindfulness classes, hindrances classes, Noble Eightfold Path classes, a Dharma facilitator training program classes. I'll probably get back to that another year or two after I finish my licensure work, but till then I've got the Dharma study classes and then one-on-one work with people. And just email me, info@ashevilleMeditation.com.
Okay.
I'll get you
Great. And are they able to reach you directly through the contact page? Oh yeah, that email address is right there on your contact page as well. So people can go to ronyabanks.com. There's a contact link, and right on there is a form where you can get in touch, and the email address is also listed for people who prefer to send it that way.
And I have a newsletter. I don't send out monthly. I send out maybe quarterly about retreats that I'm leading or class openings and things. That's another great way to find out what's happening.
Excellent. Quick follow. So I meant to ask you about this earlier, but I forgot. And you just reminded me. You say that you do work with students one-on-one. Do you is that something that you do where you charge a fee? Do you do Dana? What's your approach to doing one-on-one?
Yeah, I asked for Dana.
Okay, Dana based.
Which Dana, and sliding, people can pay me nothing if they can't afford it, or as much as they want. Okay.
Well, bows to that. I'm putting together for the SITHEADS group, it'll be publicly available, just a list of the teachers that we've had who do take one-on-one students that we feel, we can sort of let people know about and feel good about sort of encouraging people to reach out. So if you don't mind, I'll add your name to that list if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Along with your contact info that you teach on Dana, et cetera. All right, great. I don't have any new first questions yet. So Brian, would you like to ask that follow-up question? I was quite interested to hear what Ronya was going to say. So if you're up for it, I'll bring you up.
Sure. I thought your explanation was great. And you were talking about the range in which, if you're feeling tight, that's probably not a good sign. And I was trying in my mind to think, well, there's tightness and then there's focus. And I was just wondering, and I didn't know if you had a thought on distinguishing between tightness and focus. And I guess, frankly, there's been a movement in the last, especially I think in the last 5 years, around the mindfulness approach to try and meet people where they are, but then in some ways maybe overdoing that in a way where people feel like, well, I can do this less thing, but I'm still expecting some kind of results and some kind of development from it. And so I just want to be careful for myself on that, which is, you know, I don't want to be cheating myself thinking, well, I can do this sort of lesser thing. And yet I don't want to, you know, be straining or struggling or getting tight around it either, because that's not going to help me or anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's interesting is we weren't taught as children how to focus, right? We were taught quite the opposite. Like, okay, now we're going to go. I teach martial arts too, before the pandemic, and I was just amazed at how these parents were putting their children through unbelievable schedules. Like, okay, you're going to school, now we're gonna have a quick snack, now you're gonna come to martial arts, now you gotta go to your guitar lesson, and then we gotta drive through McDonald's on the way home to get your dinner, and then we gotta do your homework, and then at 9 o'clock you're going to bed. You know, this was typical for a lot of the students. And then you met their devices of mass distraction that we have now. We weren't really taught as young people to focus. We were just expected to focus. Pay attention, sit down, listen to the teacher, do your work. But no one ever brought us through, okay, there's a fly on your table, just sit and stare at the fly. And just, if your awareness leaves, come back to it. You know, this ability to sustain our attention on any object of our choice, right, has been really, it's, you know, I have didn't realize, well, you know, I probably had an idea, ADD too. So the mind was really all over the place, and trying to focus my attention on my breath was like a nightmare, or the body scan. So this tightness and focus, we're trying to learn how to sustain our awareness on one object, right? And then when it leaves, we come back to the object. How do we know that we're being too tight? Well, sometimes it takes me being like a little bit tighter if I'm really loosey-goosey. In order to focus. Sometimes I have to be like, okay, here we go. In, out, cool, warm. You know, I'm like, sometimes I have to be a lot more energetic and almost tight. And like there's someone with leading the band, you know. Okay, you're gonna breathe in, now you're breathing out, na na na, you know, because my attention is so all over the place and so unfocused, you know, that I might have to do that at the beginning, and it is a bit tighter at first, until the mind tends to calm. You know, concentration calms and settles the mind and the body, and it helps you have the effortless awareness of what's happening in the moment, right? But a certain amount of extra effort and maybe attention might be warranted at the beginning, depending on where your mind's at. But then there's momentary concentration, right? So we have single point, single object concentration, and then momentary concentration. Single point is on one object, momentary is on whatever's arising this moment in my field of awareness right now. Yeah. So if my single point concentration is becoming too tense or too tight, usually you'll know if you're focusing on your breath, you'll get a headache right here. Most people will, like, I'm gonna get a headache whenever I meditate, or my eyes hurt, or my nose. It's like, yeah, you're probably too tight around your object, right? You need to relax a little bit, kind of don't try so hard to be aware of your object. But sometimes when one-pointed concentration is not accessible to us, because the mind is bouncing around like a bouncing ball, Then we switch from one pointed to momentary concentration. That's not as tight, you know. You're just sitting back and watching this thing fly into the mind, and this, and then a sound, and then sensations, and then another sound, now a desire, now a thought, you know. So you just sit there and watch the unfolding, the rising and unfolding of phenomena as it passes. That's still concentration. You're still developing concentration. So the part of the wisdom is to know when that's needed versus when the single point would be most helpful. Everybody's different. I find that I start my practice with single point, typically just to calm and collect the mind enough to just sit there, and then fall back into momentary concentration, momentary awareness of what's ever arising in the moment, mindfulness and momentary concentration working together. But you know, be curious to know what other people do and what works for them. There's so many things that we can do. And you know, this laziness about, I think our society in particular in the West is so hard on themselves and so achievement driven and productivity driven that when they come to a spiritual practice, they're like, I'm already exhausted with everything else I'm doing. A lot of people, right? I'm going to be kind to myself. To heck with focusing. To heck with, you know, I'm going to meditate 1 minute a day or 5 minutes a day or whatever it is, if they do it at all. Because what they're needing is more ease and peace in their lives. But, you know, this practice only works when you do it. Just like anything else. So there has to be a certain amount of intention and focus and effort that needs to be brought to this practice for it to actually start to, the fruits to be experienced. Yeah. And how can people be kinder to themselves during the rest of the day and see this as a gift that they're giving themselves versus another thing that they have to cross off on their list. Yeah. That's a shift in the way we hold things and our perceptions. You know, it's kind of like saying, okay, if I give you a map to go on this trip and you take all these turns and then you go here and then you go there and then you finally go to this canyon and you go down and you find a cave, and in the walk so many feet in the cave, and then you will find a treasure. You know, it's a long journey to get there, but there's a treasure waiting for you once you get there. And then every time you go there, you get more treasure. But it's a hard journey. Yeah, you might have to go through some swamps to get there. In fact, if you have a mind similar to any of ours, you probably will have some swamps, some climb a few mountains. It won't be easy, but you'll have this treasure. If this practice is something you choose to do, and if you have the mental capacity to do it, this mental purification process, you will find more treasure there, but it's not easy.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And thank you, Ronya.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Stephen, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks for joining us, Ronya. In what you just said, you mentioned that we can approach the practice as giving a gift to ourselves, and rather than just like another thing to check off the to-do list. And I was wondering if you could say something about like savoring in practice and the role of just like appreciating the good. Yeah, if you could say something about that.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. savoring the practice, taking in the good, right? Between the swamps are periods of beauty and peace, and sometimes, it was really interesting when I was studying. I used to have an adversarial relationship with my breath. I felt like I was going to have a panic attack every time I brought awareness to the breath. And then I felt like when I wasn't going to panic, I'm controlling the breath. So I had this push-pull relationship with my breath, and I used every other object possible. And that's pretty common among people who've had trauma, by the way. But then I was reading, studying in Buddhism about, the Buddha was talking about the bliss of the breath, breathing in, experiencing the bliss of the breath, breathing out, experiencing piti, and that in one sutta he was talking about to enjoy your meditation practice and what a gift it was and how much joy it brought. And that really shifted this was before they started saying taking in the good. This was years before. This is a new thing, taking in the good. Rick Hansen has created a whole movement around taking in the good, the neuropsychologist. And I also started seeing the negativity bias of my mind, wanted to focus on the negative and not the positive. Saw that clearly. I was on a couple-month retreat, and I was doing the Vedana practice, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And I was mentally noting pleasant, unpleasant, neutral with every phenomena that was arising. That was my practice, silently noting pleasant, unpleasant. And I noticed it was almost always unpleasant or neutral, and almost never pleasant. And I was like, what's going on? So this was years before, all of this. I saw the negativity bias. My mind was constantly looking for something negative to focus on. Yeah. And there are all kinds of research now that shows that we tend to focus and remember negative. Our memory is focused on negative things. We can be having a beautiful, wonderful day, and one person says one jerky thing to us and it'll ruin our whole day. So we have this propensity to focus on, remember, and to really be aware of the negative. So it takes intention, right? This is not about experiencing pleasant at the exclusion of the unpleasant or neutral, right? This is about taking in the pleasant and having the intention to notice pleasant things when they arise in our experience. Yeah, and it takes that choice. Okay. So there are many, 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 many moments of our day and of our sitting practice when there is quiet, when there is peace, when there is acceptance of even the unpleasant can bring joy. Yeah. When my mind is fully saturated and aware, when mindfulness and concentration are together, as the horses are, the Buddha said, two horses are carrying the chariot, and they're supposed to be going together at the same speed. And if one's out of balance, your practice is going to be out of balance, right? So when my concentration and mindfulness are balanced and I'm practicing, there's a certain amount of like, oh, wow, this is pleasant. Yeah, pleasant. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to be anywhere. At this moment, everything's okay. Just feeling safe, satiated. My food, I don't need to eat anything. Just everything at this moment is fine. So looking intentionally during our day for moments that are pleasant. Looking intentionally for the beauty of in nature. One thing I love to do is when I first wake up in the morning, it's so cozy. I intentionally, my practice is to lay in bed. Set the alarm early, lay in bed for 3 or 4 minutes and just enjoy the pleasant feeling of being warm, and cozy and comfortable. Yeah. So we can intentionally choose, after going to the bathroom, there's so much relief. Oh, wow, that feels good too. Yeah. Eating, there's so much joy that can happen when we're enjoying our fruitcake or whatever it is. Yeah, and life is full of joys, full of pleasant experiences. Hearing the laughter of a child or another couple people laughing out loud, instead of like, huh, what's so funny? We can be like, oh, they're happy, they're having fun, this is great. Practicing sympathetic joy is a great way to increase and savor the joy. So we won't just be on the lookout for negative and neutral, we'll be on the lookout for the pleasurable, pleasant experiences too. When I look at my practice now, I see it as something I really enjoy doing. John said, "Oh, I'm so glad you joined us in sitting." I'm like, "Of course, it's my favorite time of the day." It's because I perceive it as pleasant, and I perceive it, even if I'm going through the swamp, mindfulness itself brings a certain amount of pleasantness. Yeah. The more we practice mindfulness, the more pleasantness we experience in our body, heart, and mind, the more we see in the world around us, the more we see in one another, the beauty, the joys, when people say something funny, or when they do something creative. And our minds. Sometimes my mind is a little bit wacky. Anybody else, show of hands, have wacky? Yeah. Anybody not have a wacky? Yeah. So I can even be internally laughing at the wackiness of my mind. Like, that was ridiculous. Yeah. And have an inner smile that happens from the chaos and the ridiculousness sometimes of this mind. Can be funny. Yeah. And I was on a meditation retreat. I was doing I had never done a self retreat before. I'd done week-long self retreats, but I decided to do a long self retreat, and it was it was really hard. And I'd realized how much I really feed off the energy of the group when I go on. I was going to Forest Refuge every year for January and February. So much easier with other people. But anyhow, so I was having a really rough time, and I was thinking about ending my retreat. I was 3 weeks into it, and I called, at that time it was Pat Coffey. He and I would call each other and support each other in our practices. And so he said he was going to be my teacher for that. I called him and I said, this is too hard. I mean, I think I'm going to end this retreat early. And he told me, what if this was the last retreat you ever got to do? What if this was the last meditation you were ever going to get to do? What if this is your last few moments on this earth? Right? Maybe this is your last chance to experience life. Maybe this will be your last breath. So he went through this whole last thing, and I was like, oh, damn. I've got to continue, because this could be my last chance, right? This could be our last day. There's nothing guaranteed. Nothing guaranteed in life. Right? Tomorrow is not guaranteed for any of us. So that helps us savor the practice too. And so does what is our highest aspiration? Like, what really brings us alive? What makes our whole body sing with purpose? What are we here for if we have a higher aspiration purpose? Are we here to flounder and crave and seek all of our pleasures and hopefully get through life with the least amount of pain possible? Or do we have an aspiration to be free from our anxieties and fears and worries, and constantly trying to feed this wanting mind that's not satisfiable. Yeah, it's a no-win situation. So when we see that clearly with our mindfulness, that can motivate us. That can have us be like, oh yeah, I really want to have my formal practice. I really want to have my informal practice. I really want to show up for this life, this really precious human life. Thank you, Stephen. Great question.
Thanks, Ronya. Thanks,
Yeah.
Stephen. Ronya, thank you so, so much for being here. This was really an absolute pleasure. And special shout out to Stephen, who was the one who connected me with you. Stephen, who asked the last question. So I'm glad he did that. That turned out to be a very good call. Any final things you want to say before we wrap?
Yeah, I want to just say how much I appreciate Sitheads and your position that you're taking there to support people's practices. I saw on your website that you have a book club and sitting club and all these really cool things that you're doing to support people. So I hope that, and the 3-hour-long sits, wow, I hope people are able to really plug in and use all these wonderful resources. And thank you for doing that. And thank you, Stephen, for inviting me. And thank you, all of you, for showing up, for bringing your own curiosity and heart and practices here. Because without coming together, there is no, Sangha is such an important thing. So thank you for that, all of you.
Thank you, Ronya. Thank you, everyone, for your time, for your attention, for your practice. Hope to see you again soon. Bye, everyone. Good night.
Good night.